Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're going to be looking at the validation controls because you need to control what the data that is being submitted by the user of your website application, because you don't want bogus information to be submitted into your database, so you need to get in control. So to quickly define what validation control is, why do we need validation controls? Validation checks the data that your users have entered to make sure that they have obeyed the rules that you have defined. You, as the website developer, as the web application developer, you must make sure that you define a set of rules so that the data that will be entered by the people using your web application will be obeying the rules. Because if it doesn't obey the rules, then you'll be getting wrong data in your database. For example, if you have a field in your website application called the phone number field, this field, you only want to make sure that only phone numbers are allowed to be inserted into the phone number field. If the user puts any other data in there, like a character, it will not be accepted. Any alphabet will not be allowed. Only phone number will be allowed to be typed into that area. Another example is the email address field. For example, if you're trying to collect email address from users, you must make sure that users cannot type any other information in there. There are some set of rules that the users must follow. The email is written as written in a way. For example, the email at address.com. The application will check to make sure that the email address has followed these rules. If the email address doesn't follow this rule, it will not allow it to be submitted. ASP.NET provides a few validation controls that makes it very easy to validate users' data before it is submitted. Because in the past, users, the web developer, we suffer a lot of headaches trying to validate input. There is a lot of codes that needs to be written, but because of the Visual Studio, the way it's been developed from ground up, the developers of the Visual Studio, they make sure that they have thought about all these things in advance, and they've provided some controls that we can just drag and drop onto our web application and make sure that everything is functioning very well without having to write any code whatsoever. There are two types of form validations. The client side form validation. This is a JavaScript code which it has been written on the browser. This can be used to perform validation within the browser. The JavaScript code immediately checks to make sure that the rules you have defined has been obeyed by the user's data. So as a web application developer, you can make sure you can write JavaScript codes in your application. When you write a JavaScript code in the browser, it immediately checks to make sure that the data being input in the form is obeying the rules. Another type is the server side, where you write C# or VB code to validate the user input once the form is submitted. But this validation is performed on the server rather than on the browser that the user is using. So you decide which form of validation you want to use, but the server side validation is a compulsory validation which you must always use, because it is your last form of defense against malicious code or bad code. You must make sure that you check on the server before you allow the data to be submitted to your database. There are benefits of both types of validation. The benefit of client side is that it is very quick. When you use a client side, which is the JavaScript code, the user gets an instant feedback. So because when they click a button to submit the form data, the JavaScript code, which is built into the browser, checks the forms quickly, and if there are any errors, if there is any errors at all, they get the feedback immediately. On the flip side, the advantages of the server side validation is because it always works. There's no way around it. The server will always check for the user errors once you've defined the rules, because it is more reliable, unlike JavaScript in the browser, which cannot be relied on because users might have disabled the JavaScript in their browsers. So the server side, the user doesn't have any control over it, so it must always occur, always happens, unlike the JavaScript, which you can turn off. If a user turn off the JavaScript in a browser, then there's no way the JavaScript code that you will be using to perform the validation, there's no way it's going to work. So that's the disadvantage. The disadvantage of client side, just like I said before, is because browser's JavaScript may be disabled, so validation will not work. If the user turn off the JavaScript in the browser, the validation will not work. Also, mobile phones, cell phones, and PDAs, they do not support JavaScript. So if you write a JavaScript validation and the user is using a mobile phone or a PDA to check your website, the data that they will input in the browser on their mobile phone will not be validated. The data will not be validated, so you'll be getting a bad data in your database. Also, the server side, the disadvantage of the server side validation is that the input needs to make a round trip. So when a user click on submit button, if your server is in China and the user is in the United States, then the data has to be sent all the way to China, comes back and tells the user if there are any errors. So there is no instant feedback. The user must wait for the server to respond if the data is good or not. So that is the disadvantage. It's slower than using the client side validation. I think that's it for now. So I'm just going to check. I'm just going to take you to Visual Studio. The Visual Studio, I want to quickly show you the part of Visual Studio where you can find the validation. It's under the toolbox. If you go to the toolbox, you can find the validation tab. So this is where you get this is the required field validator, which I'm going to show you in the next video how to use it. The required field validator is used when you want a field that is required. If you want a user to always input data in that field, if there is no data in the field, then the form will not be submitted. They must input a value in the field. The range validator checks to make sure that the user's input value in a range. So maybe you want to check, you want to make sure that the user doesn't enter any value less than 10 or greater than 50. The regular expression validator, I'm not going to be covering that here now because it is advanced. It's not for everybody, but I'm still going to talk a little bit about it. Compare validator compares to field. So for example, the password field, if you want to make sure that the users enter the same password into the field that you have provided, that's when you can use the compare validator to compare that the value in one field is similar to the value in another field. The custom validator is what it is, a custom. You can modify it to your art content. And the validation summary, this is what tells you all the errors. For example, if you use many of these validation controls in different parts of your page, then you can use the validation summary so that the user can get all the errors in one place instead of the errors flying all about the web page. So there is a particular, so maybe at the top of the form you can put the summary of all the errors in there. So that's the function. I'm going to stop the video now. So in the next video I'm going to take these validation controls one by one and tell you how to use them. So thank you.